What's up, you freaking geniuses? So in this video, I'm going to teach you what equivalent decimals are, and I'm also going to teach you about trailing zeros. So first of all, what is an equivalent decimal? Well, they are two decimals that have the same value. So let's say we were looking at the decimal 0.5 and 0.50. Okay, so are these equivalent decimals? Well, one way we can figure this out is by converting these into fractions. So if you need to remember how to do that, I'll link a video to that in the card above. But here I'm just going to write out the answer. So 0.5, that's the same thing as 5 over 10, okay? And here on the right, 0.50, this is the same thing as 50 over 100. Now, one thing we can do with these two fractions is reduce them a little bit more. So you can see 5 is half of 10, right? So we could reduce this fraction down to 1/2. And then here on the right, 50 over 100, well, 50 is also half of 100. So this would also reduce to 1/2. So you can see we have 1/2 and 1/2, and obviously those are equal to each other, right? So that means these decimals up here, 0.5 and 0.50, are equivalent decimals. They have the same value. Okay, now I want to change this decimal a little bit. What if I added another zero? How would I write this as a fraction? Well, if I just added a zero here, I would just end up adding a zero up here and down here, okay? So instead of 50 over 100, now I have 500 over 1,000. But, as you can probably tell, 500 is also half of 1,000, right? So if we reduced this, it would still be 1/2. So that means 0.5 and 0.500 are also equivalent decimals. Now, what if I added another zero? Okay, and now what if I wrote this as a fraction? Well, again, I would just end up adding another zero here and here, okay? I'll expand that a little bit. So now I have 5,000 over 10,000, right? And as you might imagine, 5,000 is also half of 10,000. So again, if we reduced it, the fraction would still be just 1/2. So that means 0.5 and 0.5000 are also equivalent fractions. So I think you get the gist of it. So let me move this over a little bit. What if I added another zero and another zero and another one, right? I could add a million zeros. It would not matter. When I turn it into a fraction right here and I reduce it, it's still going to just reduce down to 1/2. And it's still going to be equivalent to 0.5 right here. So all the zeros that you see here, okay, there's a special name for these, and that is trailing zeros. Okay? Now, what's so special about trailing zeros? So it doesn't matter if you just have one trailing zero, or if you have 7 trailing zeros like here, or if we have a million trailing zeros. Trailing zeros are zeros that come at the end of the number, so you can see all these are at the end of the decimal number, and they do not change the value of your number. That's why regardless of how many zeros we have, it's still equivalent to just 0.5. That's why a lot of times you can just kind of ignore the trailing zeros. Okay, so if I just ignore all these, then it makes my problem a lot clearer, right? Because now I'm just comparing 0.5 and 0.5, and I'm asking myself, are those equivalent? Well, sure they are, right? They're the exact same number. Okay, so now that you know what trailing zeros are, let's change this problem up a little bit. Okay, now let's say we were comparing 0.5 and 0.05. Now, are these equivalent decimals? Well, again, in order to check that, we can always just convert these to fractions and check it that way. Okay, so 0.5, we already know that as a fraction, we could write that as 5/10, right? And then 0.05. Now, if I wanted to write this as a fraction, this would actually be 5 over 100. Okay? Now, are these equivalent fractions? Well, let's see. 5 over 10, that reduces down to 1/2, right? And real quick, in case you're wondering how we do that, just divide the top by 5 and divide the bottom by 5, okay? Now we're going to do the same thing over here to reduce it. So we're going to divide by 5 on the top, and we'll divide by 5 on the bottom. Okay, so 5 divided by 5 is 1, and that's going to go over 100 divided by 5, which is 20. So here we got 1/2, here we got 1 over 20. Are these equivalent fractions? No, right? So that's one way we can check if these are equivalent decimals. Now, the other way that's a little quicker is just seeing that, okay, we have a 5 here, right? This place value right here is the tenths place, right? Now, here, there's a 0 sitting in the tenths place. And this 5 is sitting in the hundredths place. In order for these to be equivalent decimals, this number, so the 5 and the 5, they have to be sitting in the same place value. But in this example, we have a 0 that comes before this 5 right here. Okay, so that means it's not a trailing 0. We can't just get rid of it. It has to stay there. So if I rewrote these two decimals right here, so 0.5 and 0.05, again, this 5 is in the tenths place, and this 5 down here is in the hundredths place, so they are not equivalent decimals. All right, let's try one more example. Now, are these equivalent decimals? Well, in order to check it a little easier, again, I'm going to move this one over here. Okay, so I'm just going to write it down here, 42.80. All right, now, are these equivalent decimals? Well, let's see. We have a 42 here. We have a 42 here, so that's good. We have an 8 here. We have an 8 here. We have a 0 here. We have a 0 here. Now, in order to match these up, I'm going to write in a few zeros, 3 of them to be exact, okay? Because remember, it's not changing the value of my number. I'm just writing them in so I can compare them evenly now, okay? So now I have a 0 here. 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 I have a 2 here, and I have a 0 here. So, are these equivalent decimals? No, they are not. Right, because the 2 and the 0 don't match up here, okay? Now, one last thing I want to mention is which of these decimals has trailing zeros? Are these trailing zeros? Yes, they are, right? Because they're just a bunch of zeros at the end of your number, okay? So if I wanted to, I could just hide all those. Now, are these trailing zeros? No, they are not. So remember, trailing zeros have to come at the end of your number. So I'd have to have zeros over here. Okay, so these would be trailing zeros. But these zeros right here come before this 2 right here, right? So they are not trailing zeros. Okay, but I mean, if we got rid of this 2 and instead this was just a 0, then yes, all of these would be trailing zeros. All right, guys, so that's how you deal with equivalent decimals and trailing zeros. I hope the video was helpful. If it was, definitely leave a thumbs up down below. It's always appreciated. And if you still have any questions, leave them in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to try and help you out. Also, there's a playlist attached at the end of the video, so if there's any other topics you need help with, definitely check that out, and I'll see you there.